Amit is a 21-year-old computer science student from Mumbai who knew that he wanted to do a master's in cybersecurity. After weighing dozens of options, he picked a university in Canada. But there was a problem. The university needed him to have a 4-year undergraduate degree. Amit, though, like most of us, happened to have only a 3-year bachelor's in computer applications. Still, he found a workaround. He could take a 1-year cybersecurity certificate from a Canadian college with enough credits to close the gap. All he needed was some money to actually pay for it. But that got sorted out pretty quickly as well, because he had a friend who introduced him to their friend at Credila, an NBFC or non banking financial company that calls itself an education loan specialist. After the introduction, Amit had secured a 20 lakh rupees loan within days. Everything was good to go. But then disaster struck. Because just before his flight, the Canadian government de-recognized the college he intended to attend. And that was that. Amit's plan had fallen apart and he was left to pick up the pieces. Meanwhile, Credila was left wondering how it would recover its loan from him. The thing is, the de-recognition of the college was not some one-off random event. It was part of a bigger crackdown on institutions that lure foreign students with less rigorous admission norms. The country, in general, is trying to limit the intake of foreign students and is also tightening visa and immigration rules to make sure that that happens. The US and the UK are also setting up similar barriers for entry, which means for students like Amit, there are fewer opportunities now to study and eventually work abroad. And for NBFCs focused on lending for education, it means a business model that is starting to crack. The loan books of companies like Credila, Oxelo, and Avance, three of the biggest names in education lending, are dominated overwhelmingly by students headed to the US, Canada, and Britain. Nearly 80% of Credila's loans are held by such students, 86% for Oxelo, and 92% for Avance. And for them, this has turned out to be a successful bet. Or well, until recently. Because between FY22 and FY24, education loans were the best performing category within NBFCs. In fact, the profits all companies have made are really impressive. Credila made a net profit of over 900 crore rupees in FY25 on a revenue of almost 5,000 crore rupees. Avance made 500 crore rupees on a revenue of more than 2,000 crore rupees. But now, those same cushy, comfortable margins are under pressure. Suneet Singh Kochar, the founder of Fateh Education, told the Ken that study abroad applications are down by 25 to 30%, with the UK and Ireland especially seeing a decrease of 30 to 40% by January this year as compared to 2024. Of course, fewer students going abroad means fewer loans, and it's already showing in the books for these NBFCs. For example, Credila's disbursements grew by almost 80% back in FY24, but it was under 9% in FY25. Avance went from a 100% plus growth in FY23 to again just 9% in FY25. And this disruption has been serious. Enough that these NBFCs are rethinking their short term and long term goals. For example, Avance dropped its IPO plan in December, and Credila, which had filed for its own IPO in June 2025, put it on pause. To survive, the NBFCs are turning to India's domestic market instead. But that pivot has always come with its own risks. Welcome to Daybreak, a business podcast from the Ken. I'm your host, Rachel Verghese, and every day of the week, my co-host Nita Sharma and I will bring you one news story that is worth understanding and worth your time. Today is Monday, the 3rd of August. So far, overseas education lending has been a really solid business. In fact, Avance's gross stage 3 NPA or non performing assets ratio for these loans was just 0.3% as of last September. Stage 3, by the way, is reached when a borrower fails to make a payment for over 90 days, which means very few borrowers default on these loans. If you compare that to nationalized banks, you will see why this is a big deal. Education loans have the highest default rate of any personal loan category for them. In fact, the latest RBI financial stability report shows that it accounts for close to 4% of total NPAs. That's higher than categories like credit cards, auto loans, or even housing loans, which all account for less than 2%. So, why is there such a big gap? Well, it's partly because RBI guidelines limit unsecured education loans at typically about 7.5 lakh rupees. Unless you're a student that's heading for an Ivy League, in which case you could get a loan of up to 50 lakh rupees. But that means for everyone who's not going to Harvard or Columbia, what's available is only about a quarter of what it costs to stay in the US, Canada, or Britain. On top of that, banks are also slow to disburse funds. So, when the number of students going abroad increased in number over the pandemic, NBFCs rushed to fill that gap. Overseas loans soon became their core business. It made up 95% of Credila's loan book by FY25 and 80% of advances. But now that trend is starting to simmer down. Kochhar told us that the biggest factor for the jump in overseas students from 2017 to 2023 was the access to cheap loans. But now they are seeing that the loan fueled audience is withdrawing as employability tightens everywhere. Popular countries like the US, UK, and Canada are now reacting to both the mounting job market pressure and anti immigration sentiment by reducing the flow of foreign students. The US, for instance, is now swapping its once open ended student stays for fixed period visas that are tied to the duration of the program they're attending. The UK is also cutting its post study work window from 2 years to 18 months for overseas students. Even Canada has capped study permits and has cut down active student volume by over 50%. Let me put that in perspective for you through some numbers. You see, in 2024, Canada took in almost 430,000 Indian students. That was more than the US, which took in more than 330,000, or even the UK, which took in almost 2 lakh. By 2026, those numbers were down by 50% for Canada, 12% for UK, and 7% for the US year on year. Obviously, the NBFCs are feeling the hurt on their wallets. An Oxalo sales head, for example, says that applications from US bound students are down by 40% this year. But fortunately for them, that fall is not showing up in their loan books yet. And that's because the rupee has weakened. Kochhar explained to us that basically a loan that used to cost 22 lakh rupees in 2020 costs 30 lakh today. So, even with a dip of 30% in applications, total loan books haven't really shrunk. Still, the industry is worried. Enough that SBI actually proposed in May that it should double the priority sector lending loan limits to 50 lakh rupees because of rising education costs. You see, priority sector lending or PSL is very important to education focused NBFCs. They frequently sell their loan portfolios to scheduled commercial banks. And banks buy these portfolios so that they can meet their own PSL targets and avoid penalties. But now, fast increasing tuition fees, inflation, and a depreciating rupee mean that the average study abroad loan ticket size is now over 30 to 35 lakh rupees, when it used to be only 20 to 22 lakh rupees just a few years ago. The existing cap of 25 lakh rupees means that the vast majority of overseas education that the NBFCs give out don't qualify for PSL and makes them less attractive for banks to purchase. That's the problem the new proposal is trying to solve. But it's far from the only way that NBFCs are trying to lessen the damage. Stay tuned. The main fix that NBFCs are trying out right now is exploring new markets. These include Australia and New Zealand in particular. But the problem is that neither country offers the same volume as the other popular destinations. Australia is admitting about 3 lakh foreign students in 2026 and New Zealand just about 40,000. Compare that to the US, which alone hosts nearly 3 lakh Indian students. And these alternative markets are also quite restrictive in approving applications. Kocher told us that starting this year, some countries like Ireland are asking an additional question in the visa forms. They are actually indirectly asking students how they plan to repay their loans if they have to go back to India. New Zealand even takes it a step further. It asks lenders for loan details on Indian students, including whether there's any collateral and what its value is. To this, NBFCs are responding by tightening their own criteria. Namita Raja, Oxilo's head of credit and operations, said that they are now more selective. Before approving loans, they are looking at labor demands in the destination country, the kind of courses that the student has applied for, and the parent's financial strength. All of this is pushing lenders into looking for solutions closer to home. Oxilo announced a vertical for domestic education loans in May. Even Credila and Avance are expanding domestically. But it won't be an easy pivot to pull off. One reason for that is the domestic loans are far smaller. Take Avance's average ticket size, for instance. It's just 1 lakh rupees, and even those tend to default more often. Mostly because they're typically unsecured loans given out to Tier 2 and Tier 3 college students who often find it harder to land well paying jobs. In fact, a report from Red Seer, a strategy consulting firm, puts the gross NPA ratio for loans under 15 lakh rupees, which is the typical domestic ticket size, at nearly 20%, versus the 1 to 2% for overseas loans. At Avance, domestic NPAs stood at almost 2% in September against the 0.08% for international loans. Plus, there's the fact that nationalized banks also dominate this market and often have a bigger presence in smaller cities. Still, the NBFCs are confident that they can take on this challenge and turn things around. Here's one of the ways in which they plan on doing this. Raja told us that banks hand out plenty of low ticket skill loans with a repayment moratorium, which is basically a grace period where students don't have to start paying until after they finish studying. NBFCs, on the other hand, Raja told us, have decided to skip the grace period altogether and keep the pressure on the students. And then the NBFCs are also finding ways to diversify. Raja explained that it's a combination of things. Firstly, there are loans that educational institutions take out to improve their infrastructure. Then, there are also executive MBAs, which is a segment which comes with large ticket sizes. And lastly, there are always students headed to countries beyond the US, UK, and Canada. Now, these may all be strong bets. But still, with issues like a weakening rupee, inflation, and rising geopolitical tensions, it will be a long shot.
Daybreak is produced from the newsroom of The Ken, India's first subscriber-focused business news platform. What you're listening to is just a small sample of our subscriber-only offerings. A full subscription offers daily long-form feature stories, newsletters, and a whole bunch of premium podcasts. To subscribe, head to theken.com and click on the red subscribe button on the top of the Ken website. Today's episode was hosted and produced by my colleague Rachel Varghese and edited by Rajiv Sien.